Check, check.
So it's off now.
Yeah, we set it down. It's on now. You all set? You need anything?
She just is more comfortable.
Check, check.
It's good being here. I like your idea of this conversation. Yeah. You stay here. Yeah. What was that? That thing? What was that? We asked her.
Oh, I see.
And she didn't want to be so far away. Well, she's got the handheld mic.
Okay, well, that's fair.
Who knows what
I got 4 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and start. No, it's okay. Grace and peace to all of you this day. My name is Mary Catherine Robinson, and I am honored each and every day to be the pastor here at Black Mountain Presbyterian Church. Our mission here at Black Mountain is called to embody Christ's love. We ask, has everyone been fed? And we mean everyone. Thank you all for being here today, 1 year after Hurricane Helene made its catastrophic mark on our communities. To our distinguished speakers and moderator, community leaders, and concerned citizens, your presence is a powerful testament to our collective resilience and determination. We are here not to simply observe a date on the calendar, but to engage in necessary conversation. The anniversary of Hurricane Helene is not a moment for passive remembrance. It is a call to action. We gather to reflect on what was lost, honor the bonds forged in the storm's wake, and confront the difficult lessons it taught us about climate change and social justice. For many, Helene was not just a weather event. It was a crisis that laid bare deep-seated vulnerabilities in our society. The record-breaking rainfall, which exceeded 30 inches in some areas, triggered catastrophic flooding and landslides that destroyed homes, businesses, and infrastructure. Power and water outages lasted for weeks, forcing families into a state of survival. Worst of all, we mourn the lives lost. In North Carolina alone, the death toll was over 100 people, making it the deadliest storm in our state's history. But as the initial shock faded, the unequal impacts of this disaster became clear. Helene revealed how existing disparities in wealth, race, and health made some communities far more vulnerable than others. It showed us that climate change doesn't impact everyone equally, and that justice must be central to our recovery. While the church has used our best efforts to advocate for the most vulnerable in our community, giving over $1.6 million to affordable housing in this valley, over $500,000 for mental health services, discretionary funds to each principal at the schools in our valley, and feeding the most vulnerable and hiring chefs from local restaurants to cook for 2 months straight after the storm. there are deeper conversations still to be had today. That is why this forum is so crucial. Our discussion today focuses on the fundamental link between climate change and social justice. We will explore how extreme weather events intensify existing inequalities and what we must do to address them. The speakers and experts you will hear from have spent their careers advocating for those on the front lines of this crisis. They will help us examine these issues from a perspective that centers us as community. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I want to turn my focus upon two leaders of our church who have made this forum possible today. Gail Petty-Johnson is the chair of our endowment committee. Stand up, Gail. And it was in a conversation that she had with Karen Austin. Is Karen in here? Karen's in the back. Well, the seeds of the forum began this way. Karen is an elder and has provided significant leadership to our Earth Care team and Presbyterian women at Black Mountain Pres. Both Gail and Karen have inspired so many members to get involved in this forum as we serve our congregation and community this weekend. I also want to recognize our associate pastor, David Carter Florence, who's in the back. He has provided meaningful leadership to all of our Earth Care efforts here, and without his passion, his consistency, and support, none of this would be possible today. Thank you, David. Recovery from a disaster of Helene's magnitude is not a short-term project. It requires long-term commitment and investment. And as we continue to rebuild, we must strive for a recovery that is not just resilient, but also just and equitable. We are honored to have three distinguished guests and passionate advocates with us today. Reverend Dr. Patricia Toll, Reverend Rebecca Barnes, and Dr. Mallory McDuff. Each brings a unique and powerful perspective to the intersecting issues of environmental stewardship and social justice. Dr. Toll is the A.B. Rhodes Professor Emerita of Hebrew Bible at Louisville Seminary and an ordained Presbyterian minister. Following her academic career, she has dedicated herself to environmental theology and creation care. Her activism underscores that the climate crisis is not just a scientific or political issue, but a profound moral and spiritual one. Reverend Rebecca Barnes is also an ordained minister and leader within the Presbyterian Church USA. Reverend Barnes serves as the coordinator of the Presbyterian Hunger Program. In this role, she leads and supports programs that work to alleviate hunger and eliminate its root causes, connecting food insecurity to environmental degradation and justice. Dr. McDuff is a professor of environmental education at Warren Wilson College right down the road, and a prolific author known for her focus on climate justice. Dr. McDuff rejects the paralysis of climate guilt and instead inspires a pragmatic, community-focused approach to building a more loving and just world, focusing on the power of small local acts. These three women exemplify compassionate leadership and concrete action. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Toll, Reverend Barnes, and Dr. McDuff.
It's so good to be here, and I'm going to start things off with a quote that I read this morning, and I have to admit, I had friends who said, I'm going to stay off social media on the anniversary of Helene. I was not that strong. But one thing I did discover this morning was a wonderful quote by local author Patty Dye, and she writes, "Anniversaries have a way of unsealing memory, and recovery is not complete by any means." She was speaking about Helene. And so I want to just recognize that all of us, I think, come into this space, this sacred space, with different memories, some sealed, some unsealed. And that's the story. That's the stories that we bring together. And that's why we are here together. I want to start out just by getting a read of who is in the room. And so I'm going to ask you, I'm a teacher, so I get to do this. I get to ask you to raise your hands. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you were here in this region during Helene. Wow. Okay, we teachers like more than one question, so I have another question. Raise your hand if you suffered losses of either people or places from the storm. And lastly, raise your hand if you saw or were a part of local action taken in our community to address these losses. Dang, y'all. So this is who we are. Would y'all be offended if I move the gorgeous flowers? Because I can't see y'all over here. Is that okay? Okay. Okay, would you do that? Thank you. They're so pretty, but I want to be able to see folks. So that's who we are in this space right at this moment. And I also one of the things I saw this morning was Mary Catherine's post. I don't know if any of y'all saw this, just grappling with the challenge of this week, this day, this moment in history. And she wrote 3 questions that she brought to the table today. And that is, what did you go through? Where are you today? And what is next? So I offer Mary Catherine's questions as a way for us to enter into this conversation between the 3 of us. I'm so honored to be here. First of all, why are we 3 here? I want to start out by just asking each of us to, in brief, before we jump into questions, to just share the lens that we bring. You heard of bios, but I'd like to just hear a little bit about the lens that each of us bring to this conversation. So for me, I'm a local teacher at Warren Wilson, a single mom of 2, and the lens I bring is an educator and a parent and a person of faith. I'm a lifelong Episcopalian. So I'd like for both Tricia and Rebecca to share what's the lens that you bring to the conversation.
I'm also really grateful to be here with you all, and I was thinking about this because you who are sitting there are the real experts in the room and have been the ones who have gone through this. So the lens that I bring is, as part of the National Presbyterian Church USA staff, a real deep appreciation and gratitude for Black Mountain Presbyterian Church and everyone who joined hands in this community to respond. So a greetings and gratitude from the National Church is part of my lens. And the other part is we do work all around the world and see communities impacted by climate that are hitting those who are poor and hungry especially hard, is to have this understanding that those who join hands together are the hope in these hard times. And so reflecting back to you that exactly what you did of building bridges and building relationships is what takes us forward in a sense of solidarity and compassion to confront these new challenges in our world.
Great.
I too am just very grateful to be here today. A year ago right now, I was in Miami visiting my son's family and on hurricane watch, as I am every year, about Miami and all of Florida, but never expected that Black Mountain, where I've visited many times, would see such horrific flooding from a hurricane. And I've been sickened over and over by the violent storms that have cost so many lives. We had a lot of lethal flooding up in eastern Kentucky, as you know, and I grew up in Texas, going to a camp that was very close to the place where campers were lost this year from floods. There are places that you think would be safe from some kinds of disaster, and Helene demonstrated that when the weather systems turn chaotic, no one is safe, least of all those who are already living their lives on the edge. I also want to say how happy I am to finally see this table in real life. The first time I saw a picture of your sanctuary after being invited to come here, I was very much struck by the prescience of this table and the invitation that it gave to you all to make sure that people in your community were fed. It became the topic of a sermon that I gave 2 weeks ago in Kenya, in a place where they are experiencing alternating flooding and drought, and where there are children that don't have enough to eat, even on regular days. And so that became a centerpiece of some things that I had to say to the churches there. So I'm just really happy to be here finally in person.
Thank you, Tricia. And I think that our separate lenses, I think to me, speak to the purpose of this event, which is putting what we've experienced in a global context. Like, we are not alone. And we have a mandate to work together across the world. Before I get into the first question, I have to share with y'all that I grew up in coastal Alabama with a needle-pointed hurricane tracking chart on the kitchen wall.
Wow, wow.
Okay? I mean, like, hurricanes were a part of our life. We had a weather radio. Does anybody remember weather radios? Mm-hmm. So Camille, Frederick, Katrina, but I didn't anticipate, as Tricia said, Helene. And I think what we want to do today is to talk about how can we not go forth in fear, but rather go forth with this sense of solidarity that we are in communion with people all over the world, but we have to act, pray, think, and be together. I had to get in that little reference to my mom's needle-pointed hurricane tracking chart.
Yes.
So I want to direct the first question to Tricia to share with us a little bit about where you've seen the impacts of climate change in your work across the globe. You've mentioned a few examples with Kenya, for example, and Kentucky, but share with us a few specific examples.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'll start with Kenya. The second time that I went was last year, just before Helene. And for a few days, the group I brought there was staying at an airport just 15 minutes away from the international airport in Nairobi. And when I arrived, we got on the road to go to this little hostel that we were staying at, and all of a sudden got on this incredibly bumpy road, and I was like, what is going on here? And my driver said, climate change, that's what's happened. They had a severe flood in Kenya just the spring before, and they were still rebuilding a major road, as I know you have experienced very much, right there in the community close to an international airport. But this past year, as some of you know, I was traveling around quite a bit for the Presbyterian women, and everywhere I went to speak, each community had their own story of either climate disaster or climate conflict. In Memphis, they had just successfully turned away a pipeline that was going to be going right over the water system of the poorest part of town. When I was in Atlanta, they were in the midst of a fight about mining in the Okefenokee swamp. It went on like that. In every place, the issue is somewhat different, but they all go back to the environmental disruption that is coming from industries that are disrupting human health, human life, and environmental health and life. And as long as communities can stay individual and separate from one another, as long as we can stay afraid to engage with public discourse and politics, I think we are going to continue to be beset by all of this. But when, as you were saying, Mallory, when we see ourselves as being representatives of a larger global situation that didn't have to be, and shouldn't be now, and we pray won't be in the future, then we can be strong and powerful and raise our voices.
Thank you. So turning to Rebecca, I wondered if you could share with us a little bit, just describing the connection between social justice and the climate crisis, as well as with climate disasters.
Sure. A lot of people will ask, why does the hunger program do so much with environmental justice and climate change? And it is because these issues of hunger, poverty, racial justice, gender justice are all interwoven with caring for all of God's earth and all creatures. And we have found our partners all around the world and across the country that are dealing with root causes of hunger. Climate change and environmental situations are one of a couple reasons why people are going hungry in the world. And so social justice has these two components that we try to understand, is that both the negative impacts of environmental or other social ills should be evenly distributed. So we should all be taking whatever we're willing to throw out as trash or produce as toxic. We should all be willing to have it in our backyard evenly, an even distribution of the negative impacts and an even distribution of the positive, beautiful parts of, so where are our public parks? Where is access to fresh water? How do we divide those so that everybody has equal access and shares in the negative burden and in the positive access? So in climate change, that would be talking about where industry sited in our city, what neighborhoods are zoned for what kinds of factories, where landfills put, where's real estate more expensive and more beautiful and more green? And to think about what that means, because we know that all of these social structures compound. So people who are already struggling with some level of social exclusion are going to struggle more with health, with environmental impacts, and with climate change. So in the United States and around the world, this is not really a political issue outside of the United States, we found. It is not considered partisan, it is not divisive, it is real. Whether farms can produce the crops they need to survive because of drought and flooding, or whether people are able to move forward with what they need to provide food and income for their families, is a real life and death issue, not a political issue. So it's again that sense of joining hands together, coming across communities to communities all around the world to say what is good for the earth is good for people. And usually what is good for people could be good for the earth if we thought more holistically about what social justice and ecological justice are.
Well, and I think when we were planning this event and talking, one thing that came up was this kind of siloed issue or perspective that we have in the U.S. I'll just speak for myself. If I was only reading U.S. sources of news, I might imagine that everywhere climate change was politicized. And it's not. And that is so important. It's so important for my students to understand. It's so important for us to understand as people of faith. So I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to share with that point, or either of y'all, because I think it's really, really important.
I was in, my son-in-law is from Nepal, and when I was in Nepal for my daughter and his wedding, this was back in 2010, we took a boat in Pokhara, Nepal, across a lake, and I was commenting on, oh, look at these birds, they're so beautiful. And the guy who was paddling the boat, this is just a common worker, said, yeah, they're not supposed to be here right now, that's climate change. And that, it struck me then, and it struck me over and over, the same thing, that not everybody, but people all over the world, and almost every other nation in the world, besides the U.S., is involved in climate mitigation right now, and some very successfully. But they need us, too, as the nation that has historically emitted the most carbon pollution, and the richest nation on earth. They need us to be in there with them on this. And so as we see our current administration leaving the Paris Accords, leaving the climate conventions, I hope that communities across the country are saying, no, we're still in.
Yeah, I was going to just add, I think for a lot of the partners that we've seen, the question is not, is climate change happening? Is it a political thing? Is it a tool to do X, Y, or Z? It's climate change is happening. We see it. It has affected our livelihood. It has affected our lives. And so can we just move forward into adaptation, mitigation, figuring out how we can live better lives? How can we solve this problem together? And so I think that's really where I've been taught by people who are very marginalized in communities that we shouldn't get stuck arguing sort of these academic or political arguments. We should be focused forward on what can happen. So in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, I was humbled to be invited to Yukon Presbytery in Alaska. And it's one of our presbyteries that has a number of native Alaskan Presbyterians. So got to hear some beautiful singing of hymns and languages I had not heard those hymns sung in, but also around lunch tables got to hear about the fact that it was just accepted that the food sources that were traditional to their diets were not available at the right times of year because of the warming of the currents. So I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's the krill or whatever that certain birds fed on were too far down, so they were having bird die-off, but the eggs of those birds are very important for their local diet, and they weren't finding those eggs. So there are just all these stories when you travel around outside of sort of the typical urban American experience where people are just talking about this like, we can't live in our traditional ways, eat our traditional foods, depend on the way our grandparents, and we need to figure this out. We need to move forward so that it's good for all people and the earth together.
Well, and I think one thing that strikes me, particularly spending my entire adult life has been around young people, like, 18 to 24. My children are the ages. I live on campus with that age, and it's so important for me to like leave a class, and I want students to feel like they have some agency, and it's really hard, right? Like in this country at this moment. But one thing I think that I tell students that relates to what y'all are saying is that this is a quote from Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. Has anybody heard of her? I'm sure a lot of y'all have. Yeah, y'all. Yeah, I don't need this panel. Yeah. I'm just teasing. But one thing she says, and folks who've heard of her will recognize this, is the most important thing we can do about the climate is to talk about it. The surveys show that the majority of people in the U.S. do not hear people talk about the climate crisis in their everyday lives. So, imagine if you didn't talk about your household budget. That'd be a disaster. So when I personally get overwhelmed with oh my gosh, am I making a difference? That's not the way we're supposed to think. We need to think in collective. But when I want to go to the grocery store and feel like I'm connecting with people about what I see as the biggest challenge in our world right now of the climate crisis, a short little convo in the Ingles checkout line, you'd be surprised. I'm not advocating that as a strategy for everyone, but talking about the climate crisis as it impacts our everyday life, just like the examples you shared with folks, that's climate change. You'd be surprised. And that is something we all can do in our families, in our networks of friends. And I can talk. I think that's something I can do. That was a joke. Maybe not. So I want to, on that same vein, just of thinking about social justice, can you all both just share a little bit about why is social justice so important to our faith and our climate work?
You go ahead.
I think it's another important part of understanding that when we're talking about what our faiths call us to be, and that can be most faith traditions of the world. So I'm Presbyterian, Christian, I speak from that perspective, but I think most moral and ethical philosophies, most faith traditions have a sense that it is not just a personal piety that matters. If it does not then infuse you to go out into the world to make it good for people and for other creatures and the whole world. You'll find that ethic in almost every faith tradition I've ever been exposed to, that it is both very important that we do have some individual benefit and spiritual nourishment, but it has a purpose, that it is to then kind of expand us and empower us to live out in the world. And so social justice can be branded all these things, right, in order to dismiss it, or in order to box it, or make it a partisan thing, or to divide people in camps and give people labels. But the truth is, most of our faith traditions call us to live out our lives in a way that is going to improve things. And we might not agree on exactly what that would be, but there are some major things that people do across the board agree that people should have clean air to breathe and clean water to drink and food to eat on a daily basis and health and a safe home to live in. So those are all components that you can get into this element of climate change and environmental concerns just through those basic core community values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coming from a biblical perspective, one of the things that was drilled into the children of Israel in the stories of Moses in the Pentateuch was that they were there to care for the whole community. Not just for their own, not for their own household. The greatest among them were to be the ones who served the least among them. And each family, each household was connected with their own land in a way that there were several mechanisms that made sure that no matter what happened, they were going to be able to go back to their own homeland and continue to raise their own food, their crops for themselves. And you see today that heritage continuing, that in many of the places where people are the poorest on earth, it's having a place to grow their food that matters, that is the most significant for them. And I know that you all know, because I'm sure that not only were you involved in the reconstruction and the help with neighbors over this course of this past year, but I imagine that every one of us received help when we needed it, and were humbled by the generosity of our neighbors. And if we were just in little silos looking out for ourselves, as some people would have us do these days, we'd be in very deep trouble. But instead, you've become a very resilient community because of the ways that you have reached out to others and the ways that they have reached out to you. Sorry, that was me.
Well, and one thing at Black Mountain Pres, I mean, I'm not a member of it. Can I say Black Mountain Pres?
Yeah.
That felt really good. We belong together. In all seriousness, at Black Mountain Presbyterian, I mean, this place was ground zero for help. I don't know any other way to say it. It's not like, oh, y'all are so great, but you were first responders. But this place was ground zero for being responsive to the needs of everyone. And that really stood out to me, living in Swannanoa. I think we have so many examples here of the intersection, just bringing us back to the intersection of social justice and climate. The number of grassroots organizations that have begun in the wake of the hurricane are phenomenal. Swannanoa Communities Together, has anybody heard of them? Oh my gosh, y'all, Beth Trigg was on Facebook matching individuals whose houses had been destroyed to housing. That is social justice intersecting with climate. A student of mine, Maeve Williams, at Warren Wilson, really wanted to do something about the affordable housing crisis in the wake of the storm. I mean, she just wanted to. And she ended up spearheading an effort to build a tiny house, one tiny house on one small campus in one community. This is her quote. She said, I can't believe tradespeople came and students and retirees and all these different people came together to help. And they were able to donate the house to beloved Asheville that is building a tiny house community in Swannanoa. And this is just a story of social justice. You do one thing and things unfold, which is kind of hard for me to sometimes remember. But she helped to get a grant, so they're going to build 3 more tiny homes. Good. Is that going to solve the whole climate crisis? No, but is this one student going to feel like she can work together with other people to impact and make a change? Yes. Can I say hell yeah? I had the mic away from my mouth when I said it. So that to me is just, like I've written a couple of pieces about in the wake of the hurricane, and I really do, I've plagiarized myself by repeating this line. Like, I refuse to look for silver linings in a disaster that harms so many people, places, ecosystems, communities. And how we create meaning from bad things that happen is how we live, how we live our faith. So on that note, I wonder if we could pivot to talking about solutions. And I think it's really important for us to think about the collective in terms of solutions. So what examples could both of y'all share of you seeing communities providing strategies and solutions that might be relevant to us?
Well, I think that first of all, we need to know and keep firmly in our mind that over the past 20 years, technologically, we have developed most, if not all, of the solutions that we need for climate change. And the problem is not that we don't have the answers, but that as a collective society, we aren't taking advantage of these solutions in the way that we could be doing, especially in the U.S. And not only do we have the solutions, but the same poll that you just cited about people not hearing enough in their daily lives about climate change also said that the majority of Americans now believe that climate change is real, believe that it's a threat, and believe that the U.S. government, our government, should be addressing it. And they're doing this without even having heard on a daily basis about it the way we have. So we have the political will and the will to action, not only around the world, but among the American people. And we have the solutions. I think we do have to acknowledge on the other side of it that we still have very powerful forces standing in our way. The EPA, as you know, was charged very long ago, before some of us were born, with protecting the public from pollution, and more recently with protecting us against climate warming greenhouse gases. And the EPA, as it's functioning right now, is violating its own purposes. I was listening to, one of my favorite things to do is to listen to podcasts. And my very favorite climate podcast is one called Climate One. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. It's super, and they interview a lot of really superb people. And just yesterday they put one out that in which they interviewed some scientists that are making a point of standing up and telling the truth to the American people. One of them was a woman named Rachel Cletus, and she was a senior policy director of climate and energy for the Union of Concerned Scientists. And she pointed out that the Department of Energy recently released a climate report that scientists have widely condemned as misleading and full of false information. You can go to Climate One and hear all about it. I won't go into deep detail about it, but it was pretty stunning. But what was equally stunning was that very good people, smart people, are trying to make sure that the factual basis of our understanding of climate change is not erased from our records. It does continue to serve the public. So this is an example of places where we as citizens have the right and responsibility to speak to our legislators on all levels. I loved when you were talking about the, having climate conversations in the grocery store. Because that used to happen, it doesn't happen so often anymore, but it used to happen at the EV charging stations. We would be driving through Appalachia, stopping at charging stations, and guys would roll up in big trucks, and I would think, uh-oh, we're in trouble. Instead, they rolled down the window and said, oh, what does your EV like? What's it like to have one? What do you like about it? And so it was just the perfect entree for, to begin to talk about why I drive an EV and what the concerns are. But those kind of conversations boost other people in being more sure themselves that they know what's going on. But we can talk to our legislators, not only our national ones, but our state ones and our local, and make sure that the policies that they're promoting are ones that are going to be healthy for us, for our neighbors, and for the earth. And that gets down to even the public utility commissions, going and talking to those who regulate our utilities to make sure that our utilities are clean and that they are serving us as a public. And I could go on, but I won't. There are a lot of other individual solutions. Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Of course, please.
This was years ago, and I don't think it would happen today, and it certainly wouldn't happen here. But I was speaking in Indianapolis one time at a church, and after I'd said all this, stuff, this one woman at the end stood up and said, could you just tell us one quick and easy thing we could do to help the climate?
Quick and easy.
A quick and easy thing. And I was like, no, we can't. We're not going to recycle our way out of this, or, but the thing we can do, and I think each of us as individuals, as families, is to take one thing that we have a passion for, or that we have a talent for, or that we see a need for, and tackle it. Yeah. And then don't say I've done my bit, but keep on going from there. What's the next good thing? What's the next good thing? And keep building. In that we build our capabilities, we build our base of knowledge, we build the ripples around us that can see what we are doing and can join with us and emulate what we're doing.
And I would just, before we hear from Rebecca, I think with my students, I think it's really crazy to think about the fact that, like, just how they've seen government in their lifetime. Like, if you're 18, what have you seen in terms of federal government? And it's really important, I guess, for me to say exactly what you just said, Tricia. Choose something that you feel a call toward, but do it with other people. The example of the student with the tiny home, if she'd just been building that house by herself and the farm, the impact would have been minimal. But the fact that she saw all these different people coming together around affordable housing during a climate disaster, that was the strength, and that is the life-changing. Yeah, so I really appreciate it. The other thing in terms of what Tricia said, I obviously can't tell students what to say when they call their legislators. That would be unethical. But the 5 Calls app, has anybody used that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 5, it really is like 5 calls, 5 minutes in the morning, and it makes whether we see the difference, it makes more of a difference than just me drinking a third cup of coffee. And it's an app where you can call your elected officials And there's scripts if you don't want to talk off the cuff, and you can make those calls very quickly and then get on with your day. And consistent and repeated calling of our elected officials. Believe me, some other folks who care about other things are calling. And so it's really important. So anyway, so let's pivot to solutions that you've seen, Rebecca, to share.
Sure. One of the things that occurred to me as you both were talking is I think we've all heard that scientifically our bodies are kind of made to pay attention to threats, and so that we get really drawn into and continually attracted by the negative. And so I think one thing that is partly a solution is to make sure we are attracted to the beautiful, powerful stories of what is happening out there. Mm-hmm. You know, you hear one horrible piece of news and that can just take you down and lead to inaction. You know, we're frozen in place because there are all these threats coming at us, and they're real, and you all have gone through one of the hardest things any community has gone through. You will also have these really beautiful, grace-filled, creative responses that you and others and people coming from all over have done together. And somehow in our human bodies, we don't hold on to those as intentionally, and they don't inform us as much as could be good for the world if they did. So I think it's that spiritual discipline of grabbing hold of the hopeful and the good to move it forward. And then I think there's another piece of solutions that is a both and. So in the hunger program, we work at root causes of hunger, finding that the compassionate response is to kind of use that metaphor of going upriver to see what the problem is, to look deeply and analyze solutions. And some of those solutions are going to take decades to build. So the reason it's a both and is you can't just say to people who are hungry today, oh, we've got a solution and we're working this process in our committee, and then we're going to take it in 2 years, it'll reach the level of, and then finally the government is going to, you know, like you've got to do both. It is holy, sacred work to feed people from this table in the moment they are hungry, and that's why we do that. And we have to move forward into these long-time systemic structural problems that are what are holding us hostage, as Tricia talked about. There is some real work to undo in the work that is happening in rule setting and lawmaking and those kind of rooms. We need to be there too. So I just want to say there's this piece of needing the hands-on work. And some people's hearts come alive at that, and we need them there. We also need to re-educate ourselves, undo some of the things we have been taught, and re-educate ourselves so we can move forward in positive directions with awesome teachers and mentors and professors. I'm sitting between two amazing professors. We need that education piece. And then we need the people who are really good at the advocacy and the community organizing. So it's a whole spectrum. And I think we need to continue to affirm each other because not everybody has skills in every one of those places. You may be a community organizer and you really don't want to work at feeding people. You may be really great at feeding people, and it makes you really nervous to pick up the phone. So you can mostly stay here, though you should do some of all, you know, but recognize where your heart is. Mm-hmm. So we've seen amazing community stories of planting trees after huge deforestation and erosion and, you know, after disasters in Haiti, in Malawi. There are new ways to catch and hold rainwater that communities are finding out how to do, low tech and low cost, but ways to keep and purify water because communities are affected by climate change, not always having consistent water. They're women who are figuring out how to cook in their own homes in a way that's cleaner for breathing, but also better for the environment than old right now in Cameroon and Nicaragua and Guatemala. And so there's all these examples of some of the partners we've seen around the world, but also congregations. So this is one, but we have many Earth Care congregations and other congregations across the United States who are doing things with solar, who are doing EV charging stations, a good conversation spot, who are writing letters and doing public policy advocacy together to kind of address the fact it makes people nervous, and really creative worship. We are right now in what's called the season of creation, where a lot of churches between the World Day of Prayer for Creation on September 1st and the Feast of St. Francis on October 4th do really cool, fun stuff and Bible study and worship. And so, you all know this because I know some of your women's groups were doing that Bible study last year with some of Trisha's material.
And Rebecca's.
So just lifting up, organizations are doing amazing things around the world. Congregations are doing amazing things. And then there are coalitions like Bless Tomorrow is the faith arm of Eco America, Climate Justice Alliance, Creation Justice Ministries. So there are coalitions of people. So just talking again about places people are joining hands together. And then finally, last thing I want to say is I think the solution that I've stumbled into and you've recently written on is that it can be really helpful for us in times of conflict and not knowing how to move forward to use a framework of friendship and neighborliness to tend and to befriend. So I recently read this article that used these works of like tending what gives you joy, making sure we have our family parties and our laughter and our good stuff to keep us going, and befriend, both with your current circle and expanding your circle. So befriend more and more. And so those are sort of organizational, congregational, and individual things that I think we can do to help move forward in spaces like this.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And after you shared that phrase, tend and befriend, in one of our conversations, I was procrastinating grading and was looking it up. And it's so interesting because we're taught that like fight or flight are our two responses to threats, but actually, particularly women, tend to tend and befriend. We might need to do a little less tending. I'm just speaking for myself. But that, for me, just reading that and knowing, wait, that's second nature to tend and befriend. I was just joking. But that gives me hope. And on that note, I'd love to ask Mary Catherine to come up and just share, are there any ways that folks who want to get involved in the ongoing work from Black Mountain Presbyterian, would you be able to? And then we're going to take some questions from y'all, and then we're going to eat, I think.
Well, one thing is this conversation is going to be continued tomorrow during our faith formation event, which is at 9:45 in the fellowship hall tomorrow. If you want to come and be a part of that, we have an Earth Care team that meets every single Monday at 1 p.m. They study books together. They are having conversations about what they can do to make a difference in our community. We also are developing a social justice team under our outreach and mission group. So anyone is welcome to be a part of that as well. We have invested in 3 affordable housing projects. One is Mountain Housing Opportunity, which is going to be right down the road in Ridgecrest. We also invested in beloved Asheville and gave $500,000 to them for their small village that they'll be creating in Swannanoa. And then we also invested in the Fuller Disaster Rebuilders, who are doing the work on Edward Street in Swannanoa. but they are also advocating for an affordable housing project on Blue Ridge Road. We all have voices. We come from a place of authority because we have experienced this climate disaster together. So you all have the voice and the authority to speak on climate disaster. And so the best thing that you can do is to use your voices and to share them, to tend and to befriend. Yes.
So we have a few minutes for questions from the audience, and there's a mic in the center. But if you could make sure to use the mic when you're asking a question so we all can hear.
My name's John Kuhn. I'm a member here at BMPC.
Get it up close.
Up close. Okay, all right. Thanks. You made several comments about the current administration. I think it's easy and safe to say that support for environmental programs is the lowest it's been since before Richard Nixon. See that as a significant problem. Trust in public institutions is at a low for a long time, maybe pre-World War II, I don't know. Considering those two things, does the environmental movement, I'll say, or movements, need to come together and reassess the themes, the points of concentration? Does the message need to be simplified? Do we need to persevere? Do we need to chill out until at least 2028? At the high level, what policy and directional issues should be addressed? And if that's not the level you want this conversation to go, just tell me and I'll ask it another time.
That's a tough one.
Spoken like a former professor at Georgia Tech, might I add. It was a good question, plural. Let's jump in, I guess. We'll maybe answer one or two of the questions that he asked. So we'll, yeah.
Yeah. I see people fumbling with what to, all across our nation, people are fumbling with what to do in response to the things that are going on. And I think, just as you just now pointed out, one of the things that we can keep firmly in our mind is this is not normal. This is not normal for the United States. And it will take us, even when we get back on track, it's going to take us time to build trust again in among the ordinary people of our country, but also in the world community. But I think that one of the things that we can be doing is continuing to watch for the local things that are going on in your cities, in your communities that are moving forward, and magnify those, support those, and make sure that other people know in other cities, in other states, the things that are going on that are positive. Because even as the federal government has made a project out of destroying the EPA, and many other institutions, the CDC, and other institutions that the American public rightfully relies on. NOAA, I'm looking right at Mark, who retired from NOAA just a few years ago. I don't know about you all, but I have faith that those are going to come back. And in the meantime, we're the conservators. We're the ones with the memory that these institutions used to be strong and that they will be strong again. And we won't take them for granted, I dare say, ever again. The other side of it is that even as this time of history is so distressing, we can also look back on how far we've come. I remember in 2013, I think it was, standing out in front of the White House in Washington, D.C., trying to, with a crowd of maybe 50,000 people, thinking, we need 500,000, we need 5 million people here. And we were trying to convince President Obama to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline. And that wouldn't, we've come a long way from that point. When our country began to, just 3 years ago, created the largest climate legislation in history, that was a huge turning point. When Pope Francis wrote the very first encyclical on climate change in 2016, that was a huge turning point that continues to radiate out around the world today. So we have a lot of things that we can mark that are real signs of awareness and progress. I want to name another one that I feel that not very many people know about. I'd like to see how many people are aware of this. In July, the United Nations International Court of Justice, did you all hear what they did? A few people are nodding their heads. They ruled on a request that came from students in the tiny island nation of Vanuatu, requesting that they rule on whether countries are legally obligated to forestall greenhouse gases. Not just morally, but legally obligated to do so. And they ruled unanimously that was the case. They said forcefully, and I'm quoting here, harm caused by climate inaction, including the continued expansion of fossil fuels, can constitute a violation of international law. Now, how that's going to be tested and whether it's going, I think it will be tested, and what is going to happen as a result is going to be very, very interesting to watch. But that's another piece of the puzzle that's coming together. So I think watching for those things keeps our spirit going. The other thing that keeps our spirit going, I really believe, is just to act, just to find the things that we can do day by day.
Next question. My name is Helene. I live in the Grovemont section of Swannanoa. It's been quite a day today. I've been on the bridge, the Whitson Bridge, down the street, that was closed for us to do a remembrance ceremony. People that I've lived in, well, let me back up. I am an alumni of Warren Wilson College. I came here 51 years ago. I was 18. And I knew that the Swannanoa Valley was my heart home. This is where I was to be. And I am a retired educator of 14 and 15-year-olds, earth and environmental science. So this week has been something else. I heard Naomi Tutu speak out of chaos, her talk at Warren Wilson this week. I've been to a community meeting at Art Space through Mountain True. I sat with a woman who spoke very little English, and there was a translator there. And she had no idea what the meeting was about, but she still needed help. And I was able to be a conduit for that. Everything that you have, and I'm a PK, Presbyterian preacher's kid. Anyway, thank you to Black Mountain Presbyterian Church. I ate meals that you prepared lovingly. I say thank you to the speakers for being here and pointing out what is going on in other countries in this world, because I don't know. What I know best right now are the people in my community that I didn't know before, that I just had a hamburger and baked beans and a plantain, of all things, with neighbors and that I knew and neighbors that I just met for the community art project that is in the old Methodist church on Whitson Avenue. It's amazing. All of us are finding our way and finding our ways. I also attended the post-Helene symposium at UNCA this week and heard students, UNCA students who wrote a story. They were tasked to interview someone. They were freshmen when the storm happened. They had just come to campus. This is 1 year later, and they have done amazing interviews, and they got up in front of us and told their stories. This is the way. This is exactly the way. Everything that you have said, young people, this is the answer. There's a pen pal project. This woman who is doing a volunteer thing. People of all ages can write a letter to somebody that was affected by Helene, giving them support. It can be just this tall of a human being who's learning how to give and to work together. So my point today is to say thank you for what you're saying here and around the world and for bringing it back to us.
I'm getting my steps in today.
Hi, my name is Nico. I'm actually also a Ward Pilsen graduate. Thank you for sharing what you just shared. I graduated in 2010. I moved here just about 20 years ago. And I'm not a part of this faith community, but I've lived in Swannanoa. I live in Asheville. I live there with my wife and kids. I love this place so deeply. I am a social worker, and I'm a therapist now. And when I was getting my master's degree, something I was really interested in was the overlap of social work and climate justice work, because there's just so much there. There's so much space and complexity. And then living through Helene, which I didn't really expect, did any of us, really connects to a lot of what I talk about as a therapist, which is nervous system regulation and dysregulation, what safety feels like, things that are grounding, being present, healing from past traumas. We're all in the midst of that now. It's something that I talk about a lot, and I think this is also generational. I'm an elder millennial. We don't like toxic positivity. And, truly, we don't like toxic positivity very much. And that's something that I think about a lot with what's the difference between positivity, validation, holding space, grief rituals. One of the things that's given me so much hope about experiencing Helene is seeing the way that people came together. I've had clients say to me this week that they feel so much more hope having lived through Helene, even though we would never want to look for the silver linings in the disaster because of the scale of this tragedy, and also the way that it brings people together in community to take care of each other is so amazing. So my question is, what are your thoughts about holding space for this grief and this processing as we're also making these action plans and coming together in coalition and things like that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking a little bit about this because there is a lack of trust in institutions that a certain part of the population has had for a long time, that lots of other parts of our population that have been marginalized for generations have not had in the same way. And so looking to form relationships and holding space for each other to listen to voices that haven't always been in traditional discourse, I think is one of the pieces that has come to my mind, that some of the things that are both trauma response, but also I think we're seeing right now in our culture is the things that create isolation and fear and reactivity and kind of trauma response can be the same whatever area of work you're doing. And so then, yeah, trying to find the ways in to the healing and the truly generative paths forward out of those can be the same. And I think this is sort of a side comment, but I'm seeing that in my position, that whether it's the cutting of SNAP benefits or the raids on immigrants in our communities, or the really making diversity and equity bad words in our institutions, these are the same forces that are also things that people go through with natural disasters. So you could kind of frame it as like human or political disasters, and some of those responses are the same. So I think it's a really good point, and I don't know that I have a full answer because of my background not being as strong as yours in there, but I really believe that our bodies are holding these things, whether it's racism or climate impact or going through what you all did a year ago, that there are ways that we need to hold real grief and lament from our tradition. Lament is all through the Bible. We've got, all these Psalms of lament that can be really healing, just to rage, just to be honest and angry and know that God can hold that, but also to try to hold that for each other and to try to find ways that aren't toxic positivity, as you said, but truly healing. So I don't feel like that's a full response because I don't have one, but maybe others have some thoughts.
Well, I think we're also, one, I want to appreciate all the Warren Wilson grads asking questions. They're not plants. But we are getting to time for dinner, and the only thing I'll just say to Nico, to your question from my perspective, is one of the things I've been doing with students is a curriculum called Climate Wayfinding that was developed by Catherine Wilkinson and Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who are the editors of the book All We Can Save. And they've developed a curriculum for college students to try to help college students find their way in the climate movement. And one of the modules that my students enjoyed is not the right word, spoke about the most, was about emotions and motivations. And we do a lot of drawing, they read a diversity of authors, we bring poetry into it, and I think what you said about holding space constructively for people to deal with the emotions that are happening right now. So with that, I'll let Mary Robinson.
Let's just say thank you to these wonderful women. I really want to encourage everyone here to stay for dinner. We have plenty of food. The conversation can continue around the table with some good music as well. You can speak to our speakers too. You can follow all the yellow signs. There are going to be people leading you to where we're going to be serving dinner. Coyote Rodeo is going to be playing music too. It's going to be wonderful. But start with those 3 simple questions. Where were you when the storm hit? How are you today? What's next? And have those conversations with people that maybe you don't know around the table. And just start small. That's what matters. But thank you so much for all of you being here. We are going to be studying Dr. Toll's book, Inhabiting Eden, on Mondays at 1, and then also Sundays at 9:45. So come and be a part of that too. Get involved in a small group locally. It'll make a difference. Thank you so much.